architect when it comes to revenue operations, and a big Iron Man fan also. Initially, I thought the Iron Man, the marathon, but then he explained me, no, it's about the Marvel. It's
Amazing.
about all connecting everything together. So, Joe, welcome to our show on revenue
Iron
operations,
Man.
and let's welcome all the people in the house. Thanks for waking up so early in US. What time is there?
It's about 8 o'clock Eastern time here in the morning, so it's not too early. It's a good international time for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. So, guys, we are on AirMeet. If you are watching on YouTube or Facebook or LinkedIn, then you can join us on AirMeet for Q&As. We will try to have an eye on the questions also in LinkedIn. But today we will go in some pretty interesting details when it comes to RevOps projects, because Joe has a huge experience in enterprise and when it comes to more technical side of things. So Joe, as far as I know, you started initially in AT&T where you were like this software engineer, more like enterprise system lead, and then you dived into RevOps. Maybe you can give us more information about how you started with this whole journey of RevOps, and then you can transition into what we will talk here today.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you, Romeo, for having me here. It's a pleasure to chat with all of you. Hopefully, we can answer some good questions today. Looking forward to the Q&A as well. Certainly, I think no one comes out of college, at least back then, thinking, "Hey, I'm going to be a RevOps person. I'm going to have that as one of the things that I focus on." So certainly, I think we all fall into it by accident. I'll actually share a story along the way. Certainly, I think we were doing revenue operations work without knowing it was revenue operations, since that term wasn't really coined yet, right? You were trying to manage a customer, you're trying to optimize that revenue cycle, but there wasn't a fancy marketing term we can kind of slap on the sticker. So, yeah, began life, computer scientist, hardcore developer, really working on, large scale enterprise systems, working on resiliency, working on trying to ensure that the back end of the company was working properly. But you always had that customer in mind, right? You weren't just developing a feature to develop a feature to mark off a sprint. You were developing something to satisfy a customer, to sell more product, to streamline a conversation. Move from that technical aspect to owning some other businesses throughout the way, to moving through, renewable energy, to building that from scratch, to focusing on, Salesforce as a core operating system for a company, enabling you to essentially multiply, fictionally the number of full-time employees you have just by using technology to pull that heavy weight and to streamline operations. And in doing so, we realized that we were focusing the entire business around trying to make that customer happier, to decrease the time to quote, to increase the satisfaction, to decrease errors and contractual fallouts. And it wasn't until years later I looked back and was like, oh yeah, that's RevOps. Because now everyone has the RevOps logo. We're talking about it. It's on the tip of everyone's tongue. I mean, it's almost impossible to scroll on any social network at the moment and not see something RevOps related. So, essentially, kind of fell into RevOps as a part of my function through sort of technical care and managing the customer, and then trying to operationalize and streamline the customer conversation, because at the end of the day we're all trying to make that customer happier, right? We're trying to satisfy, to grow, to gain more sales, and RevOps is just a very nice way to package that particular goals that a company may have.
Yeah, so we have a lot of things here because you as an architect and also having this tech background, for sure you can show us and tell us what's happening in the market, where we are going, and what are the biggest challenges in this. So today we will break down those operational projects and understand them. So, Joe, let's share the screen so that we can dive into more discussion about the topic. And meanwhile, I will make notes. I will have questions for you, and I will look into the people who joined live if they have some questions on that. And a happy Kids Day, yeah, like Children's Day. Today it's the International Kids Day. So if you have kids, or if you feel kids, then happy anniversary.
We're all still kids at heart, right? That's why we're still smiling.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Marvel, right?
It's adult cartoons, and I'm still amazed how many they pump out of there, and the graphics and the storyline. It's kind of intense. It's still interesting. Our children these days are going to watch them all in one clip, right? It'll be a Saturday afternoon. They're going to see 10 years of information, but we piecemealed it out for our age category.
Yeah, cool.
So let's dive in. So thank you all again for being here. As Romeo mentioned, kind of discuss a little bit about kind of how we got here, a little bit about recent trends. As I was working on this conversation here, I realized again, revenue ops is really a great marketing term, something we've been doing for ages. If you go back way past probably any of our lifetimes, a Rolodex. What was a Rolodex? It was a way to more easily remember and converse with your client base. Essentially, that was a form of optimization, right? There were probably a bunch of papers flying all over the place, or writing on random scraps, and someone came and said, "Oh, let's put all your customers in one place." And this is, maybe you want to consider this your first CRM if you're going to be sort of metaphorical there. So we've always been doing this, right? Everyone selling a particular product or service wants to sell more. They want to be better than the next one. Is your widget better than their widget? Is your item faster than their item? And RevOps is certainly the conversation around which that sort of performance optimization takes place. What RevOps does, in my personal opinion, is it gives us something to hang our hat on, gives us something to follow, sort of a set of directions. So instead of saying, I'm trying to optimize a customer conversation, or I want to do this better, you're trying to put everything underneath an umbrella. And underneath that umbrella, we sort of codified particular stacks of efficiency, whether you're making your deal desk more efficient, or your marketing operations, or your sales enablement. We're all trying to do the same principle, but by working together, you sort of marry those synergies, and you just get a bigger result, I think, for your effort. Um, what has also allowed this to happen, again, if you look back, over the last many decades, is that we've just been producing a plethora of tools. Perhaps too many tools. If you look, I think some of the Martech slides that are out there, just the quantity of tools that are in our ecosystem at the moment is almost unfathomable to remember and kind of get your hands on. But what they have done is they've created choice, and they've created the ability to use those tools to optimize in ways that just a normal human team cannot. And when you marry the use of technology with specific principles in your mind about how you want to sell your product, and how you go to market, and how your customer consumes your particular product, that's where you see, I think, the magic happen. You take the tools, you take that intimate understanding of your company and your clients, you move that together, and you're able to sort of create some magic in that revenue conversation. For this particular webinar here, there's a few goals. I know Romeo and his team had laid out sort of the objectives for today. So first, we want to discuss the role of people in successful teams. Now, in my opinion, if you put technology out there, more or less, if the technology is solid, it just works, right? It just works. It turns on, it turns off, it does what it needs to do. When you have people, that's where you get the fun part, right? We're all different. We all move in different ways. We're unpredictable. We have different desires and goals. And you cannot forget the fact that humans are involved in every part of a team and of a revenue operations stack. So how do you work with people successfully? How do you bring them into the conversation? How do you ensure that you're working together to utilize the strengths of all your team members in the right fashion, not just assuming that they're another piece of technology? The people on your team is not just another widget, right? They're not just another API integration to plug in. They have feelings and desires and goals. And if you don't recognize that, I feel that doesn't really help move you forward in the proper direction. Next, resistance to change. If you read the book ages ago, Who Moved My Cheese, we're supposed to believe that change is always positive. We can discuss that, here or there. But essentially, RevOps is typically about change management. We want to change things for the better. Obviously, sometimes maybe not. Everyone makes mistakes. You go back, you reiterate, but it's all about change. And when you are a department in an organization constantly changing things, people can have different thoughts about that. So you need to be able to be well versed in how to manage those expectations and kind of move through your enterprise with more of a streamlined feel. And last, we'll do some examples. We'll talk about different companies, whether it is ones where the go-to-market motion was, not defined, whether it was, complex quoting, integration of applications, and we'll discuss, some experience I've had, and hopefully they can be useful to others along the way. Sounds good, Romeo?
Perfect. I'm really curious about navigating resistance because that's the biggest sometimes.
Absolutely. So we'll jump in. We'll start with the people factor here. So in many of my teams, we like to focus on this sort of trio of terms. People, process, and tools. And you don't want to focus on one while negating the other two. So long story short, people bring a company to life. Without people, what do you have? Processes streamline that revenue conversation. They enable you to do things in a particular repetitive fashion, and tools improve the working condition. For example, let's take Salesforce or any CRM. Can you honestly imagine, working through several hundred clients a month on sticky notes or Excel sheets and trying to, organize all those particular elements of the conversation and still be productive, right? And still answer those questions in a matter of seconds. So, Nancy, a client calls, hey, what's going on? I got to pick up the information. You can't do that without tools. It's just not realistic these days, and our expectations are higher. So, when you're looking at whether changes in your company, integrations, conversations, process modifications, it's important to look at how that affects each piece of this triangle, as you need to satisfy all three to be successful. And throughout this conversation, I think we'll sort of see that each of these has their own part and their own challenges, but they really have to work together to be in a positive light. So one of the things that we always see is when we're looking at particular teams is that everyone has a desire, right? We're all here because we have a particular skill set. No one does everything. We all do specific functions, which is why there's titles and roles and sort of lanes that some of us tend to stay in. And each of us believe that what we're doing is optimal for our own task, right? So, the following isn't negative at all for each department, but it's sort of an idealistic view about what each department typically cares the most about. So, sales needs to close, right? Commission based, got to close a client, got to have success, got to create as the minimal amount of friction possible to marry that client together with my product. Marketing is looking at driving that early part of the funnel, getting leads in, optimizing them, seeing high conversion rates. Finance needs numbers. They're report driven. They have to be factual. They need to have all the statistics. And customer success, in most organizations comes in more towards the end. What happens after you sell? How's that deployment procedure? How's their satisfaction? How's the usability, the NPI scores? What kind of upsell do I have? And each of these particular stakeholders in the revenue conversation is consistently looking through that lens because that's what they're being judged on. That's what they're being scored and paid on. But what really happens is that we're all working together. We're all trying to do the same thing. And in many cases, people do work together. But as humans, it's good to point that out and say, hey, we all know we're on the same page. We all know that we're trying to do the same thing. But let's verbalize and factualize the fact that we're trying to do this. Let's try to look at our functions not as individualistic functions, but more as a synergy of trying to move that revenue conversation forward in a more streamlined fashion. So what we see here as well is that when we're looking at these individual teams, and again, we come back from a time where teams were more individualistic, right? The concept of working together, matrix organizations is relatively more new in our history than, let's say, historically speaking. So teams have their own view of data, reporting, metrics. What are they judged on? What are they reported on? And oftentimes, those particular predispositions can sort of mentally stick the conversation, perhaps in a segmented direction. When you take the human aspect as well, some individuals could have louder voices, could have more power in a conversation. So if you have four different teams in a room, and let's say for argument's sake, your marketing person has a more powerful conversation than your finance person, Perhaps your reporting lends more in a marketing favor. Perhaps you're not looking at the entire conversation. Perhaps you're adding things to your CRM, segmented more towards the loudest asker, not the quiet person. What RevOps does, it allows you to look at this holistically and sort of more evenly weigh those responsibilities, so you can get that end result with all teams involved. Important thing I like to also point out is that when you are looking at individual teams and you're not looking at them in a solidarity approach, is that you leave intelligence on the table. And I think that's a missing factor for many teams. We buy these incredibly expensive tools from a time, from a labor, from a maintenance point of view. We're really spending a lot of money, resources, and care to grow them. And at the end of the day, the tools do what we said they would do, but it's really the intelligence that's supposed to come out of the tools that moves you from one level to another. So great, I have all my data in Salesforce, but are you using the data to answer questions you don't know exist? Are you writing the right reports? Are you looking at the right summaries, the analysis, the delta between different stages of your cycle? Are you using that information to make decisions and bubble that up throughout the enterprise to feed back information that your teams or your leadership may not have originally asked for? When you use these tools in sort of a harmonious fashion, you are fortunate enough to have that data, which can help drive decisions. Because gut feelings don't always work, right? You could be the best person on your team. Your gut feelings could be trusted. When you say, "Hey, Mr. Mrs. Executive here, I'm looking to have this conversation. I see this major change. I think we should do this instead." The next answer is going to be, "Prove it to me. Why? Your gut feeling doesn't mean I should rip apart my entire enterprise. Where's the data?" And these tools allow us to have that data.
And I suppose that what happens is that someone who has a louder voice also has different metrics that they are measured, right? And they are having their own agenda, so they are pushing towards that, aka I don't know, MQLs for marketing, right? So, and they don't look at the revenues. I see these silos many times happen, right? So this is the moment when a RevOps leader needs to come in, let's say more independent stakeholder, right, to align those teams. And this RevOps needs to be the right hand of that chief revenue officer. If not, then you go in this vicious circle that you are biased with the numbers. The loudest in the room wins the discussion. And as you said, you come up with that business intelligence that is totally out of scope for the leadership, and it's not actually showing what we need in the organization. So that's a good point of view, in my view, that the human factor and the need of that RevOps person to facilitate them.
Yes, and certainly, it's not to the fallacy of any team to sort of have that original desire, right? They were hired for a particular function. They're trying to work to the ultimate success of that function, and we'll actually get to this part later in the presentation, I feel. But getting people to shift that mindset from giving up a little control on their decisions and kind of buying into that groupthink actually raises their own metrics as well, because the overall speed and betterment of the RevOps cycle makes all of their functions improve more. It's really getting that sort of that mind shift of thought from uh, a department specific level of thinking to a company level specific thinking. Similar to, we have SKO events, right? Sales events, you're typically led by the sales and marketing teams, but this, conversation should be a revenue kickoff event. Should those individuals who are involved in revenue be there, rebranding it, renaming it, and having people understand that it's a conversation we all are part of. So many changes probably afoot in the industry related to that. Um, Similar to that point, the goal of RevOps is proving and through our actions and through the results that we do work for everyone. We're not working for ourselves. RevOps doesn't work for our own metrics. We're not commission based. We're not there to try to make some metric faster for our own team. We're there to facilitate others. So in the same way that operations teams in general are the glue between many departments, and they're there to provide that sort of that service bus layer, right? The plumbing, the electricity, the water, the trash collection. We're there to sort of streamline the pain points, the commonality between different teams, so they can be more effective. Revenue operations, operations being in that title, essentially does the same thing, and we're there to support all others in the conversation. And in doing so, we need to make sure that we are inclusive of all the stakeholders. We take into mind, what does their role typically entail? What are their positives and negatives? Are we having conversations with stakeholders on a weekly basis? Are we friendly? Are we working in a mutual fashion? Do we also understand what is important to them and how they communicate? Everyone comes from different technical backgrounds, different architectural ways of thinking. So if you have a leader on your team who might be less technically savvy than others, maybe change the conversation. You're talking about the same thing, but you alter it so you can both be on the same page and you can understand what's going forward. You don't have to be, one single way of communicating to everyone. It's not, hey, let's put out this text, everyone's going to consume it, and we assume we're all robots and everyone's got it. Nod your head, great, let's go forward. It's really more about massaging the conversation, making it unique to the team, building that engagement. In some similarities, RevOps is sort of a sales group. We are working to market and sell to our stakeholders for the success of their own teams. And it's sort of like a little, I think, hidden underneath part that we don't talk about too much, is that there's a lot of conversation in building that trust to enable us to go make those kind of changes. We discussed the intelligence aspect, and I think that's very key, and that's something where it's intelligence across the pipeline, across the cycle. We can look at things, across dozens of different tools and pull back answers where individual teams wouldn't necessarily have that ability. And finally, which I also think is sort of a ultimate benefit, is pushing forward those small wins for the team. We all can have goals. We want to reduce some number from X to Y. We want to increase something from A to Z. But you don't get there overnight. You don't get there alone. And there's many steps along the way that are positive, that move something forward, that tweak something. Whether you tweaked a quote to be a little better, you modified a contract to reduce one more red line. Each one of those is a positive attribute, and it should be celebrated, because the more you celebrate with your team, happier everyone gets, and the more likely you can move forward in a better fashion.
Hmm. Great.
So change management. We talked about change management, I think, since the first slide here. But change is not always accepted as a positive, right? Change requires new thought, new education. It requires the ability to say, "Hey, I was doing something today, and I'm very comfortable with it. I have to rethink." Every time you rethink, it's a context switch. You have to, remember new stuff. It takes more time. You're going to make mistakes right away. Convince me that change has to be there. If we're looking at different size organizations, one might say that change in a startup might be faster because they're less beholden to that process, right? The entity is younger, the processes are less mature, people are used to things changing very quickly. Whereas as you move into more mature organizations, a change means several thousand people can be altering their way of work. Are you sure that's the right thing to do? Are you sure that's a time saver? Are you sure that's going to work correctly? Because rolling that back is going to be much harder than in a smaller, younger organization. We also need to look at holistically, how do you want to live as a team? Do you want to live where you are trying to be scalable and reproducible? Or do you want to use the duct tape and band-aids approach? Many entities still like duct tape and band-aids. It gets you there fast, it gets that quick win. You're happy and move forward, but does that make you successful in 3 years, in 5 years? Can you ensure that you're able to be audit ready? Can you meet your compliance obligations? Can you scale from that 10 million ARR to that 50 million ARR? Duct tape and band-aids doesn't do that for you, right? You have to be reproducible. You have to have a process.
Yeah, I see this duct tape and band-aids, like it is very visible nowadays with the crisis, um, especially in tech, that we had an abundance of technology. We had especially software engineers were needed in the market, so companies that were providing services like IT outsourcing, they were not really looking into these processes, and they were like, okay, a duct tape and band-aids, it's okay for my organization. But then as soon as the whole crisis started, right? And we all know why. We don't need to go into those details. Then suddenly it was like, oh, we are losing clients. We are losing, a lot of clients are churning. We need to lower our um, all our services because there is an abundance of software engineers in the market that are on the bench, right? There were layoffs and so on. So mm, I cannot put high prices anymore. So when this situation happens, now I wake up and I say, oh, I need to invest in RevOps. And when I mean RevOps, marketing ops, sales ops, customer success ops, and so on and so forth. So I'm wondering, is it like um, a good time to start and to to go away from that duct tape way of thinking into a more mature way of thinking? But that means a lot of investment. So maybe we can talk a little bit about how to make those decisions, because the total cost of ownership of RevOps is quite high when you were in a duct tape approach and now go into a more mature approach where you need to have clear processes. So I wonder what's your take on that situation, because this is what we have in the market today.
Yeah, I think if we can go back to the technical aspect, when you're doing development and enterprise architecture work, you're always looking to try to refactor your systems to be more efficient, to be more performant. Operations, revenue operations is really no different. Um, and one could say, oh, you're in that role. You always want to optimize. You always want to be better. You always want to not have duct tape. But I also see someone's asking a question about proving, ROI. I think you have to take the desire to always have a perfect approach and then look at the business. What does the business want? If the business intends to not look for a long-term plan, then maybe duck and bandits is what they need. It's not their plan. If the business is looking to scale and to grow, and they have particular international goals, or they have particular, funding goals, that's a different story. So, what is the end game that you understand? Is whether it's 1 year out, or 5 years out, or 10 years out. Where do you want to get? And is your current team processes and cycle going to get you there? If the answer is no, then optimization makes sense, right? You kind of proving that this is a solution to get to your desired end state. And in doing so, you prove the ROI. You've got the team to go from where they need to be to where they want to be. And RevOps is one way to do that.
Oh, we can go into this ROI because I see Andrew has also some questions, but later on we can touch upon this whole ROI thing.
Sure. So kind of, that question again, like sort of walks right into this is, looking at where you are today, can you imagine, let's say for argument's sake, your coding process takes you an hour. Again, that seems quite large, but it certainly could happen depending on the complexity of the deal. Does that scale well? Can you spend an hour of your team to make one quote document based on how many doc quotes you want to have out per day? How many clients you want to have a conversation with? Can you get from your current ARR to your future ARR? Do you see that everything you're doing is a bespoke process? Is everything a one-off? Is everything a singular conversation, or can you see things flow through the system in an automated manner? When you're looking at those results and you're getting that intelligence from how you're operating, you can start to understand what efficiencies you can be gaining. And when you gain those efficiencies, what do those resources do with that time? So if sales and CS and marketing and finance are now saving time, they can invest that time in other more profitable parts of the company. So it's really a good conversation all around. We touched
Mhm.
on the startup versus mature, and I just want to kind of run through a few points. But typically some of the major things we look at is the go-to-market knowledge, existing processes, how you're managing stakeholders in your existing data. And there are significant differences between the size, maturity, and complexity of an enterprise that allows you to understand sort of what you're stepping into. So is your go-to-market knowledge there? Do you know how you're going to market? Or are you still feeling your feet? If you're still feeling your feet, there's no reason to be investing thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars in automation software or locking down a particular process in Salesforce. You don't know what that process is yet, right? Why spend all the money? So being realistic in what you're expecting. How are your existing processes? Are they strung together like like shoelaces, or are they well documented? That's going to determine how you manage your stakeholders, how you go through the unwinding of things, how you build that business case. And finally, your data. Your data is the lifeblood of your business, is where that intelligence comes from. Do you have a lot of data, a little data? Is it clean? Is it not clean? What happens when you change one piece? Does it change something else based on your integrations? You have to look at those particular pieces and then understand the change and benefit from that particular modification, and then view that through the eyes of your stakeholders. So we're really kind of moving the core work of RevOps through change management and then back to the actual people involved in order to allow that change, to be bought into. So key indicators that a company needs change. And I'm sure we have our own individual versions of what that is, but just a few of the things that come to mind most often. Are you and your team constantly doing one-offs? Does everything feel like it's brand new for you? Does everything feel like this is just a new version of the widget? Are there multiple versions of the truth? Are there several different reports that answer the same question but have different numbers at the end? That shouldn't happen, right? If they're both giving an answer to a particular element of your cycle, that answer should be the same. So is your report ownership correct? Are your data sets correct? Are you looking at the right filters? It's amazing how many times people can sort of move reports through leadership or through a system as being boasted as being the correct data. And then if a person very skilled in the back end of that revenue system looks at it and says, "Oh, your filters are awful, the timelines are awful. You've sort of segmented this incorrectly," and it's very misleading. So it's very important to have control over that information to produce the intelligence required. Are your teams creating workarounds? In an operations role, you typically understand sort of the little conversations that aren't publicly shared between teams, and do you understand that, oh, this team doesn't like this process? They've got their own little worksheet. There's like a Google sheet somewhere that does this differently. Or, these opportunities don't fall in Salesforce because they're too hard to put in, or we're going to wait till this particular other date happens. Those are signs that maybe something's not correct. Maybe you don't understand the business and the go-to-market motion correctly. Or perhaps, there's a process in your RevOps system that needs to be modified. You need to talk with your stakeholders more and work with them to be successful. You don't want one-offs. That's data loss. Data loss means your intelligence isn't going to be accurate. Reports are less than truthful. And last, if a client starts helping with your process to help the deal go forward, that's just a bad sign. You don't want a client being like, "Hey, I know your process isn't so good, buddy, so I'm going to help you out just so we can get this signed." That's just an ultimate sign to come back to your team, sit, cry for a little bit, and then figure out how to not have that happen again. So just a funny little aspect there. Into the fun stuff I know Romeo was talking about. So some examples of experiences that my teams have had. Hopefully they'll be relevant, to the audience here, and we can kind of use them to sort of see some lessons learned and sort of how some things were accomplished. I know many people in RevOps calls typically you see these days are all B2B SaaS. I figured we would start with a different type of conversation, just kind of spice it up a bit. RevOps is not just for B2B SaaS companies, right? It's for all companies. It could be for your car dealership. It could be for your ice cream stand. Everyone's trying to get revenue. So this example is for a home service company, a B2C. Deal range relatively on the small side, 25K to 125K, multi-state, month close, give or take, both in-person and remote sales. But the catch is that the product is custom built for every sale. You're not just selling widgets, you're customizing something. And how do you put these particular attributes into the revenue machine and get out an answer? So the problem that they were experiencing is that very high volume quoting, many quotes per day, but each quote required custom pre-sales activity. So humans physically need to go out, they need to engineer something, they need to kind of create a solution, they need to test it amongst a number of checks and balances, and they need to do heavy financial modeling on that particular solution to see the viability of the return for the client, so you can present the actual solution and the ROI that will be delivered. So these are relatively heavy asks, right? When you look at a CRM, you're not often saying CRM financial modeling or CRM engineering. They just don't always marry together. But if you look at this from an architectural aspect and you say, "Hey, I want to drive efficiency," everything can kind of work together if you think about it in the right fashion. So can I pull in engineering automation? Can I pull in financial automation? And can I kind of put that all in my CRM or revenue tooling to streamline that conversation and not have data loss? So a solution that the team had looked at, Salesforce became the center of the universe. If it wasn't in Salesforce, it didn't exist. Couldn't talk about it. What that meant is that all the pipes in and out from all of your other tools had to communicate with Salesforce either by API, using AWS, using some other intermediary, but the data had to come in. So Salesforce was always your source of truth. So what we did, we built a custom integrations between our design tools. So just imagine what every company does, whether it's an engineering tool, design, or some architecture work, pulling that information in, having the particular data required to make decisions available in Salesforce as custom objects. So now you could work on them. You could treat them as part of the system. We built a financial engine within Salesforce. So Salesforce isn't just WYSIWYG front end, nice and fluffy stuff, right? There's a full enterprise level coding system underneath Salesforce that your architects and developers can go to town on, right? You can build it to do whatever you want. It's incredibly powerful. So building a financial engine within Salesforce is totally fair game. And in doing so, you are able to really treat this as a full management solution for your client. You're able to work on the client request. You're able to look at your engineering data from your other team. You're able to understand financial parameters. People who are not financially savvy can run financial analysis and make decisions using the checks and balances that Salesforce provides for you. And at the end of the day, you can marry all that together, and we're able to create, customized PDF quotes on the fly, store them properly in Salesforce, and then spit them out with traceability, all within Salesforce. So what would have been very separate teams, very separate processes, lots of handoffs that could have been complicated, lots of communication discrepancies. Let's not even count the number of Slacks or emails back and forth. All went into one system. All the data that you cared about was in one system. All the traceability, all the verification, all the reportability. Um, that's what we did. So thinking about Salesforce or any CRM that you're working on, not just as a place to store customer data, but as a place to really streamline the conversation to quote, to contract, to close, is really a different way of using the tools and getting more value out of the tools to really answer your business question. And your business question will be different for everyone, right? You're doing something unique. How you do it could be different. How you go to market could be different, and you cater the tools to your own individualistic requirements. And that's one way you can use these things in a bit of a different fashion than, let's say, the marketing data sheet tends to portray.
Yeah, I think if we look at, okay, this is Salesforce, but if we look at HubSpot, there are some of the things that they really developed a lot, and you could potentially come up with a similar solution also in HubSpot nowadays. So when I look at custom objects, that's something that it is possible, and you can do the coding and the data sets. That also some that could be done. I think connecting it with other systems, what you're showing is it's doable also in HubSpot, but definitely you will need to bring in those folks that can build it in code, right?
Yes, it's certainly enough point and click. You have to understand your systems. You have to be able to communicate with everyone. You have to understand, the development aspect of it, and then marry that with the revenue system.
Mm-hmm.
So
Got it.
moving on to back to the B2B part. We did a B2C, we'll go to B2B. So quote to close one. So in this particular example, we're looking at a SaaS-based company, a little bit of a higher deal size, a little bit of a larger territory, a little early in the go-to-market life cycle, and with a longer close period. And we're trying to analyze, optimizations from a quoting and from a contractual point of view, using the RevOps team to sort of drive change throughout the company. So the problem in this case is that due to the fact you're earlier in your go-to-market motion is constant tweaking. You can't necessarily trust what people tell you. You can't necessarily trust that the process you're using today will not change tomorrow, that the product won't be altered, that there won't be a new country you're adding in. So you need to look at your decisions in a way that is flexible and that allows you to support the business, but also not put yourself into a corner where you can't get out. And it's very easy for a RevOps team to do that. To make changes in your CRM or changes in your process that makes you view the world through a certain lens. And if you don't realize that that lens can change, You yourself might be the issue, not necessarily the other stakeholders. So you need to also protect your own team from being too focused on what someone tells you as being the way you'll do things forever. You always have to assume things will change within your own enterprise. The second is that the particular process here required multiple teams provide individual inputs. So whether you're looking at custom engineering information, custom product information, custom delivery information, pricing information. So you have a very large amount of conversation need to happen. Again, early go-to-market motion, less reproducibility, less ability to kind of price things in a repetitive fashion. Um, Due to the international nature, again, heavy red lines, so heavy contractual conversation, heavy, back and forth, and a few other elements, non-even subscription terms, things like, let's say, 13.75 months. Salesforce doesn't really like that. That makes it a little bit offended. Being audit ready, always being able to meet those financial requirements, being able to report on what you've done, and also having security. So if one team in one region is doing stuff, maybe they don't need to see the things another team in another region is doing. How can you protect against that kind of data loss and concern? So solution, um, chokeholding essentially the most critical process, which is getting to that close one flag in Salesforce. That had to be something that a single team was owning, and that ability to change to close one had to be based on a particular written process, which is sort of an understanding and agreement between all the stakeholders on what that means to be closed one. Do we have a definition that is synonymous and used across all the teams? And in doing so, we're able to understand, look, there's, let's say, 10 inputs to get to this particular state. What are the teams that provide those inputs? What is the shape and color and size of those inputs? What are the conditions by which that can change, the conditions by which that is accepted? What are the escalation paths to get things done quicker so we can reduce that time to close? All those particular process elements, while not necessarily automations in the system at the current time, they allowed the revenue operations team to sort of take control of the conversation and be able to guide the teams and the stakeholders to a solution that worked at that point in time. Going back to the change management, going back to early go to market motion. What you're doing today may not be the same thing you're doing in 3 months, or 6 months, in a year. And sometimes just putting down checklists and process and guidelines and restriction rules in Salesforce is really helping the team, is one of those small wins, and helps to minimize that friction and move things forward. It's not always going to be, hey, full-blown code automation, full-blown integrations, full-blown single pane of glass, all your information in it. Sometimes it's just analyzing the process and trying to get that process to be repetitive in whatever shape, form, and color it happens to be at that time, which goes back again to the people aspect. Can you understand what you're doing? Can you sell the right solution at that time and getting that buy-in? So here the ROI isn't going to be massive changes in your CRM, massive changes in your revenue operations system. It's simple changes in your process, creating reproducibility, and also creating trust. A sales team who understands that there is a very complex selling motion will feel better knowing that that complex selling motion is somehow bound by a script as opposed to being the Wild West. So simply creating that process and that checklist builds the trust you need to go fight the next battle. In 3 to 6 months, maybe you're doing things in a repetitive fashion. Now you can start to create automation. You can start to lock down your quotes. You can start to do things faster in your CRM. You can kind of grow from a speed point of view, but you got to get your legs first. And sometimes I think a revenue operations team can help a younger company get those legs faster and kind of prevent some of the missteps from happening that could happen without the kind of leadership. Going back again, keeping the peace between stakeholders. And I know I feel like we repeat this 1,000 times, but I also feel it's sort of a missing element. And, as operations leaders, we see that happen, way too often. Care. So sharing with people, setting the expectations, what they're going to get, what they're not going to get, when they're going to get it, eliminating details that they don't need to know about. Maybe there's this really cool thing you did in Salesforce or HubSpot or Zoho or something else, or there's something you did in outreach and it's awesome. Your sales team doesn't really need to know that. Your marketing team may not need to know that. It may be really cool for you and your team, but what is the result that they got? Did you change the conversation to meet their expectations? Hey, salesperson, We are reducing your time to close by 2 days because we've automated the quoting and contract process. Or, hey, marketing, we can now get you metrics faster on how that campaign went to how we actually converted the customer. Those are the things that people are caring about. Those are things that kind of check their boxes. So at the end of the day, you're still accomplishing the same revenue goal. You're still accomplishing all those cool things on the back end, but you're selling it to each stakeholder in a way that is consumable to them. So reframing that story to be consumable and meets the value proposition of every stakeholder is sort of the key missing piece, not just doing the action, but then selling it so you can all celebrate together. Last but not least, integrating with intent. So we all buy these tools, we all purchase them with the hope of having our companies run from them and be able to be valuable to us. But integrations are sort of a special little part of the conversation. So typically you want to integrate things together, in my opinion, to worry about data, user interfaces, and access. You want to be able to view the data all in one place. You want to be able to massage and understand it in one single pane of glass. And you want more people to access that data so they can actually be empowered. But there are positives and negatives to that conversation. When you look at the data part, what data can come in? Can all the data come in? I've seen many products, purport a particular integration, and then you purchase it and find out, oh, you know what? We've got 70 fields. We're bringing in 55, and the delta that's remaining are the ones you really need. That's not an integration. So are you analyzing it to make sure that integration meets your use case? Are you understanding that when you bring that data into your system, changes in one system will affect another system? Your HubSpot or your outreach change now affects Salesforce, which kicks off a field change trigger, which kicks off some other process. Now a customer got an email they weren't intending to get. So you got to think about that whole process end to end. User interface. Are you able to view what you really need to view in that end system? So vendor X has a product, it integrates with your CRM. You think that's great. You pull it into your CRM and you realize that I can't get the view I need. There's this graph I need that's not here. There's this table, there's a summary, there's this dynamic element. So really kicking the tires and ensuring that the use cases presented match what your company wants. That's a really key part to the integration. I see many companies move forward with integration to kind of bring them in and say, yeah, we bought X and Y, we're going to marry them together. But how can it do it? Can you do it to the proper extent? Very key points I think that need to be focused on to make the integration successful and allow it to provide the value that you're expecting. I like Legos. I think going back to the whole Marvel comment, anyone with kids, happens to be a Lego fan at some point. But the good thing about Legos is that they've been around for decades. And a Lego from, the 50s or 60s is going to work just as fine as a Lego today, and they're going to snap together. And the integration is seamless. There's never a question that the pieces are not going to fit. Not everything is like that, right? So when we're looking at integration, we need to understand that they are unique and they have their own different shape and feel. So what are the costs to integrate? Is that cost beneficial? If it's going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars to hire a team or a consulting team to move something together, are you going to get an ROI that's higher than that? In many cases, yes. Let's understand it. If you are early in your go-to-market motion or you're early in your understanding of the reproducibility of your process, maybe that's not really the right time for it. Maybe let's evaluate that in 3 to 6 months. Do that once and understand if it's going to work correctly. Look at the maintenance cost. The more integrations you add into your CRM or into your system, each one of those pipes back and forth is essentially the plumbing. It's the plumbing of your organization upon which your data flows from left to right. Do we understand how that data flows? Do we understand the maintenance of that data, the cost of going forward? The more things you have communicating, when you make a change in one system, you now need to understand the ramifications architecturally across all of the integrations. Is that something your team is able to do? Are they at the skill level, of maturity level to look through that data mapping and understand how things move forward? If your company needs to change things very quickly for argument's sake, but you have too many integrations, your speed to make changes in your system are going to be reduced simply because of the weight you've added on to the system. So it's important to understand how these things will work based on where you think you're headed, based on the skill level of your teams, and based on what can really happen, with those integrations. Speaking a little bit specifically on some of my history with Salesforce integrations, and we have a lovely Jenga puzzle here. Integrating for the sake of integrating can lead to your own personal Jenga prison. And what I mean by that is that the first time you do it, it's great. I've got all these heavy integrations. Everything talks together. I'm so happy about that. But that also ties you to that particular way of thought. Perhaps what you want to do in a few months isn't going to match that integration. You have to unwind things. It's like taking out a shoelace and trying to do it in reverse. So when you're integrating, plan that integration. Bring in some architects who have done this beforehand. Make them understand your desires, looking at all the different ways things are going to communicate together. And think about this not from a knee-jerk or short-term position, but from a mid to a long-term position. Am I going to be married to this integration for a while? Am I going to be able to have it harnessed to pull out the information I actually expect? These are really key elements to really give it thought, to really understand all the elements necessary to make that successful. Having your architect team talk with the integration architects team, move things together. How's the security of the elements work? How's the backups work? How's the data flow? How's the synchronization? What happens if I change things here or change things there? Those conversations I feel are very key to really be successful when you are investing very, very heavily in this part of your revenue operations stack. And I think, believe with that, I think we can open it up, Romeo, for some questions, perhaps.
Perfect. Yes, we have some questions here. You can stop sharing so I can put the questions. Thanks a lot for this. It's really really in depth. So we have here a few questions. I will show it on the screen. So um, first thing is about actually the return on investment, right? So how do you deal with that return on investment from RevOps projects? Like how do you report on metrics and so on? Andrew, if you want me to get you on screen, on stage, just let me know. But yeah, I hope that I put the question that you want, Andrew.
Sure. I mean, so for this one, I think it's very important to look at the results that change will occur. So if you're able to reduce a quoting lifecycle, if you're able to streamline the time to a PO, look at those things for more numbers. So for example, by automating certain parts of my system, I can spit out a PO 2 days earlier. That's a return on investment right there. You're
Mm.
going to get cash into your bank faster.
So the
If I
velocity,
can
basically.
Exactly. If I can produce reports at a quicker clip, my business intelligence increases. So, for example, if you have a lot of disparate systems and each one has their own reporting output, perhaps you only look at that once a month or once a quarter because it's too painful to pull all that stuff together. If you're able to combine that data and get a summary level of intelligence or dashboards for your enterprise and deliver that to leadership once a week, you can see the changes in your business. You can see how the graphs and the motions are going and pivot much faster. So your investment there is being able to drive the course of your business in a much faster fashion than you could have in the past. Other ways, you can also bring answers to your team. For example, let's say you're looking at seat counts used. Perhaps you're understanding that there's a way to upsell based on all the data in your system, pulling out that intelligence from your CRM, understanding how clients typically move in terms of their SaaS purchases. You can use that data to come back to the business and say, hey, based on these trends, we think you can upsell in this manner. There's a potential X million upside by doing this. So I think our ROIs are a little bit different than your typical definition of ROI. Some are value based, some are time based, some are percentage based. But if you can figure out what that is based on your action, I think that is the sellable component. Hopefully that answers the question a bit.
Yeah, it's really good. I think also when it comes to uh, sales ramp up time, right? Like, and this enablement part of it, like how fast can you put your salespeople on your CRM and start selling? Yeah, like how much time do they need to adopt that new product or new service that you're having, or all the changes that you are doing? Because the systems should actually support your sales reps to sell faster and better, right? And have that time on the customer rather than, I don't know, filling on details in your CRM. But this is very um, basic, fundamental measurement of your RevOps. Okay, so let's see. We have also Fred here. So I don't know if you can see the question, but when it comes to customer experience optimization, is it complementary with RevOps? How do you see it?
I've seen again. I think the definition of RevOps is challenging. I've seen some companies ask the question of what is the definition of RevOps and what does it actually mean? And depending on which school of thought you go to, it can include many different functions. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I think customer experience in general is part of that revenue life cycle because an increase in experience obviously helps you, decrease your churn, increase your upsell, increase the case studies and market awareness and potential sharing of the goodness of your particular product or service. So whether or not it really exists in the RevOps stack, I think kind of depends on the own organization and how it's structured. But I think many of the principles of RevOps and the bringing in of all the different functions to enable that to be successful also applies to customer experience.
Perfect. Thank you. And also from Andrew, I will put this question um because it looks like, yeah, when we look at Salesforce, I think it looks like we need a lot of IT people and a lot of processes, a lot of stakeholders, while if you use just HubSpot and let's say PandaDoc, it's quite simple. So is Sa- is Salesforce overcomplicating the whole thing, or is it because the organizations are different than the ones that use HubSpot?
Yeah, I think certainly it kind of goes the whole, low code, no code versus, heavy metal SaaS type stuff. I think they both have their place. There is not the ability to say that one is the ultimate king over the other or one is better than the other, in my opinion. I think it goes back to what is the use case that you're trying to solve. If your ARR is beneath a certain amount and you are focused on a particular customer segment, you may not need the amount of customization required to move forward. The same way with many people can get away with the regular PDF reader on your Mac, right, or your Windows machine. If you use PDFs, that's great. Others need to edit PDFs. They need to massage and control them. They need a higher level program. That's the same way to look at all the different CRMs and different revenue tooling. Buying the tooling that fits the needs of your company at the stage you're at the stage you'll be at in the short term, is meeting that use case. So if your complexity does not require that heavy level of integration or custom coding, then you should be picking the tooling that best suits that for you to not overcomplicate your teams and not require some of those more advanced experiences in certain other technologies. So is certainly a time and place for both. And if you do tend to require that very intense level of complexity, then yes, to get the most value out of it, it could lead to requiring some more individuals who are more experienced in that technology. But I wouldn't say to go for that technology if you don't need it right away. You have to look at what you need for where your current enterprise is and where you're currently headed, which is why the market has so many different options.
Mhm. Perfect, perfect. So thanks a lot. I think I'm aware of time, so we are heading to our 60 minutes mark. Thanks a lot, Joe. This is really um, refreshing, and it's really important for us to understand the complexity of things. Also understand the Salesforce side of it, because you did, just to understand and have it clear for everyone, you did heavy duty, enterprise architecture stuff. So it might be simpler for someone who is using a tool like HubSpot, right? Because the processes are definitely different. So if you guys have questions when it comes to HubSpot, definitely you can reach out to me. And if it's something when it's on Salesforce and that enterprise grade, then Joe, it's someone who you can definitely reach out to on LinkedIn. So that being said, thanks a lot. It definitely it looks like an Iron Man type of a engineering when it comes to setting up RevOps, but we can start with baby steps. And the most important is to have the people aligned, to have the stakeholders aligned on those metrics, because if you have that alignment, if you have that buy-in on RevOps, the rest is just a maturity plan that you can build with the consultant, and you can take it baby steps. You don't need to have everything out of the box, and you pretty much cannot have that. It's really hard just to it's not a plug and play thing. um so yeah, any last things, Joe, before we call it
Well, I mean, thank you again, all of you, for having me here. I hope the information was useful to many of the listeners that were on today and those who might view it later. Certainly, as Romeo was saying, take those small wins. Those baby steps are really key. You don't start out going full level right away. The each day you're able to do something to help your team be successful, to reduce the time of complexity and to optimize, is a win for you and your team. And as you accumulate those wins, it kind of makes things go forward at a faster clip, and you can see even greater things in the future. So take those small wins, work together. Tons of information out there to be successful. As Romeo mentioned, if you go to HubSpot, him and his team have some phenomenal resources. So it's really great to use the community to your advantage, so you can be successful. And thank you all again.
thank you, guys. Have a great week ahead. Bye bye.